Have you ever told yourself, tomorrow I'll be more disciplined? You set your alarm earlier. You write out a plan. You promise yourself that this time it will be different. But then just a few days later, everything goes back to how it was. You procrastinate. You quit halfway. You find yourself wondering again, why don't I have discipline? I have encountered that question thousands of times in my life. And what's interesting is, most people are asking the wrong question. They think discipline is something they need to try to create, like an action, a skill, something they can turn on when needed. But the truth is, discipline is not something you do. Discipline is something you are. Imagine a tree. You can try to tie apples onto its branches, but that doesn't make it an apple tree. Only when its roots change will its fruit change. Your life is the same. You don't fail because you don't know what to do. You fail because you are trying to act like someone you have never believed you are. I have observed the most successful people. They are not people who try to be disciplined every day. They simply are disciplined people. They don't struggle with themselves every morning. They don't have to convince themselves to act. Because for them, it's not a choice. It's who they are. And that is what very few people understand. You don't do what you want. You don't do what you should do. You do what reflects who you believe you are. In this video, I will share with you the deepest mindsets, so you don't just have discipline, but become a disciplined person from the root. Not by forcing yourself, but by redefining who you are, and you should stay until the end of the video, because the final mindset may change the way you see your entire life. Mindset 1. You don't do what you want, you do what you are. I once met a man who told me he wanted to change his life. He said it very firmly, that he wanted to wake up earlier, wanted to work harder, wanted to become more disciplined. But then I asked him a very simple question. What kind of person do you think you are? He went silent. And that's where everything begins. Because you see, a person's life is not determined by what they want. It is determined by what they believe they are. Most people live in a very strange contradiction. They want a different life, but keep the same definition of themselves. They say, I want to succeed. But deep inside they believe, I'm someone who quits. They say, I want discipline. But in their mind, they keep repeating, I'm not that kind of person. And do you know what happens? They will always return to where they started, not because they are weak, but because they are loyal to their identity. I want you to imagine something. If you believe you are someone who doesn't like reading, you can force yourself to read for a few days. But then one day, you're tired, you're bored, and you go back. Not because you lack discipline, but because that action does not align with who you believe you are. People always seek to return to internal consistency. That's why some people are always on time. Not because they try every day, but because they believe, I am a punctual person. Some people always keep their promises. Not because they are stronger than you, but because in their world, breaking promises simply does not exist. Do you see the difference? One person is trying to act. One person is living in alignment with their identity. And the most dangerous thing is, you may not realize your true identity, but it is always controlling your life. I have seen very intelligent people, but they constantly sabotage their own opportunities. They procrastinate when they need to act. They quit when things get hard. And if you ask them why, they will give you hundreds of reasons. But the truth is much simpler. They are just behaving consistently with who they believe they are. And this is what you need to understand. You don't do what you want. You don't do what you know is right. You do what aligns with your identity. If your identity is someone who gives up easily, you will find ways to quit. If your identity is someone who procrastinates, you will find reasons to delay. And this happens naturally, without effort. That's why many people feel like they are fighting themselves. One part of them wants to move forward, but the other part pulls them back. That's not a lack of willpower. That's an identity conflict. You are trying to act like a new person while still holding on to your old definition of yourself. And you cannot win that battle, because identity always wins over willpower. I remember once observing a friend. He said he wanted to change. He started waking up early, started exercising, started working more seriously. But after just 2 weeks, everything stopped. When I asked what happened, he said, I don't know, I just couldn't keep it up. But I knew. It wasn't that he couldn't keep it up. It was that he returned to who he believed he was, an undisciplined person. And when you understand this, you will begin to see your life in a very different way. You will stop asking, why can't I do it? And start asking, who do I believe I am? Because that is the real question. Not what your goals are, not what your plans are, but what identity you are carrying every day, because that identity will determine every action you take. And if you don't change that, no matter how many times you try, you will return to the starting point. But when you begin to see this, when you realize the problem is not in your actions, but in who you believe you are, that's when a new door begins to open. A door that doesn't require you to try harder, but requires you to look at yourself more honestly. And from there, you will understand something even deeper. Discipline has never been a matter of action. It is a matter of identity. Mindset 2. Discipline is not an action, it is an identity. I want you to imagine something very simple. Two people wake up at 5 a.m. The first person opens his eyes and feels tired. He has to struggle with himself. He thinks, I should get up, but I don't want to. He pulls the blanket over, then throws it off again. A small battle happens in his mind. Eventually, he gets out of bed, but it's an exhausting victory. The second person also wakes up at 5 a.m. He doesn't think much. There is no struggle, no resistance. He just gets up, not because he is stronger, not because he has more motivation, but because, for him, it's not a decision. It's who he is. Do you see the difference? Same action, but two completely different worlds. One person is trying to be disciplined. One person is disciplined. And this is the point most people never realize. They think discipline is something they need to perform, a list of things to do, a series of actions to maintain. But real discipline does not start from action. It starts from identity. If you believe you are someone who has to try to be disciplined, then every day will be a battle. You will need motivation. You will need inspiration. You will need to convince yourself, and that cannot last, because humans cannot live forever in a state of resisting themselves. But when you begin to change how you define yourself, everything begins to change. I once told someone, don't say, I'm trying to exercise. Say I am someone who exercises every day. You might think that's just wording, but it's not. It's a shift in identity, and identity changes how you act. When you say, I'm trying, you place yourself outside the action. You are someone attempting, not someone living it. But when you say, I am, you bring that action into your nature. It is no longer a choice. It becomes a standard, and people always act to match their own standards. I remember a businessman I once met. He was always on time, always well prepared, always kept his promises. I asked him, how do you maintain such discipline? He smiled and said, I don't try to maintain discipline. I'm just not the kind of person who breaks promises. Do you see? He doesn't focus on actions. He defines who he is. And from that definition, all actions become natural. That's why there are people you look at and think they are very disciplined. But if you ask them, they don't feel that way. They don't feel like they are trying. They are simply living in alignment with who they believe they are. And that is what you need to understand deeply. You don't need more willpower. You don't need more motivation. You need a new definition of yourself. Because if the old definition is still there, all your efforts will only be temporary. You can change your actions for a few days, a few weeks, even a few months. But if inside you still say, I'm not a disciplined person, then sooner or later, you will go back. Not because you are weak, but because you are being honest with your identity. And this is what makes many people feel stuck. They think they need to try harder. They think they are missing something. But the truth is, they are just trying to fix actions, while the root remains unchanged. Like trying to change the shape of a shadow without touching the light source. Your life is that shadow, and your identity is the light source. If the light does not change, the shadow will never change. So the question is not, what should I do to be more disciplined? But, who do I need to become so those actions feel natural? That is a different question, a different level, a completely different approach. And when you begin asking that question, you stop looking for quick methods. You start seeking internal transformation, because you understand that discipline is not something you add to your life. It is something you build into who you are. And when that happens, you no longer have to force yourself to act. You are simply living in alignment with your identity. But this leads us to a very important question. If discipline is identity, then how is that identity formed? How does a person become a disciplined person? The answer is not in big decisions, but in much smaller things. Mindset 3. A disciplined person is someone who keeps promises to themselves. I want you to remember a very familiar moment. You tell yourself, tonight, I'll work seriously. Or, tomorrow morning, I'll wake up early. Or, even simpler, I'll start again today. You say it sincerely. No one forces you. No one asks you. It's just a promise you make to yourself. But then what happens? That night you procrastinate. The next morning you turn off the alarm, and today becomes tomorrow. If this happens once, it's not a big deal. But if it happens repeatedly, it begins to create something invisible. Not failure, but a crack within yourself. Because every time you break a promise to yourself, you are sending a very clear message inward. My words are not trustworthy, and that is more dangerous than you think. Because you can lie to others, but you cannot lie to yourself. You know what you said? You know what you promised, and you know you didn't do it? I have seen many people try to build discipline with big plans. They set high goals. They write detailed schedules. They start with a lot of energy, but they forget one very simple thing. Discipline is not built from what you intend to do. It is built from what you actually do after you say it. You can speak well. You can plan well, but if you don't keep promises to yourself, you are breaking the foundation of your identity. I remember once meeting a young man. He told me he lacked confidence. He didn't believe in himself. I asked him a question. Do you keep promises to yourself? He was silent for a moment, then shook his head. And I told him, then don't ask why you lack confidence. Because confidence does not come from what you say about yourself. It comes from what you prove to yourself. Every time you keep a small promise, you lay one brick. One brick for your identity. One brick for your belief. One brick for the person you are becoming. And on the other hand, every time you break a promise, you don't just lose an action, you weaken yourself. That's why many people feel undisciplined, but don't know why. They think they need more motivation. They think they need a new method. But the truth is, they are just living in a loop of breaking promises to themselves. And over time, they start to believe, maybe I'm just not a disciplined person. Do you see how dangerous this is? It's not actions that create belief, but those small actions repeated quietly define who you are. So if you want to change your identity, don't start with big things. Don't say, I will change my life. Don't say, I will become my best version. Start with something much simpler. Keep one small promise. Just one. A promise you know you will keep. It could be waking up 10 minutes earlier. It could be reading 5 pages. It could be finishing a small task you usually delay. It doesn't matter if it's big or small. What matters is you say it and you do it. Because in that moment, when you do what you said, something very special happens. You begin to believe in yourself, not because you speak better, but because you proved it. And when that belief begins to form, you are no longer someone trying to be disciplined. You are becoming someone who keeps promises. And someone who keeps promises is always disciplined, but be careful of a trap. Many people start well. They keep promises for a few days, even a few weeks. Then one day they slip. They miss once. Then they think, I'll restart later, and everything collapses. Not because they failed once, but because they allowed one failure to become a new definition. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I just want you to understand one thing. Keeping promises to yourself is not about perfection. It's about consistency. If you slip, come back immediately. If you mess up, fix it immediately. Don't let one weak moment become your new identity. Because every day, you are still rewriting the story of who you are. And when you keep promises to yourself long enough, you will realize something. You no longer need to push yourself. You no longer need to fight yourself. Because at that point, you have become someone whose words and actions are one. And that is the true foundation of discipline. But this leads to a deeper question. If identity is built from repeated small actions, then what actually creates those actions in the first place? What determines whether you keep your word or break it? The answer is not in willpower, but in very small choices you often overlook. Mindset 4. Identity is built through repeated small actions. I want you to imagine a river, not a large river from the beginning, but just a small stream flowing through the earth. At first, it barely leaves any trace. The ground remains flat. Nothing visibly changes. But day after day, that stream keeps flowing, quietly, repeatedly, without stopping. And then one day, a small groove appears. Then that groove becomes deeper, wider, until it becomes a real river. Your life works the same way. It's not big decisions that create you, but small actions repeated long enough. But this is what most people misunderstand. They think that to change their life, they need a big turning point, a powerful decision, a strong enough motivation, a fresh start. And so they wait. They wait for a day when they feel ready. They wait for the perfect moment. They wait for a better version of themselves. But time keeps passing, and nothing changes. I've seen this happen too many times. One person says, "When I have more time, I'll start." Another says, "When I have more motivation, I'll get serious." But you see, they are putting conditions on action. While action itself is what creates who they are, you don't need to become better to start. You need to start to become better. And that start is not in big things. It's in things so small you can overlook them. I remember someone once asked me, "What is the most important thing to change yourself?" I told him, "The small things you think don't matter." He laughed, because he thought I was oversimplifying. But the truth is, those simple things are what shape your life. A small choice to wake up 10 minutes earlier. A small decision not to procrastinate. A small action to keep your word to yourself. You might think, that's it? But you don't see what's happening inside. Each small action is a vote for the person you are becoming. Not once, but hundreds, thousands of times. And over time, those votes accumulate. They form an identity. Not instantly, not in a day, but inevitably. I have seen people change their lives, not through one big decision, but through small actions repeated consistently. One person starts reading 10 minutes a day. Another starts writing down goals every morning. Another starts working immediately at the start of the day. Nothing impressive, nothing extraordinary. But after a year, they are no longer the same person. And the interesting thing is, they don't feel like they tried that hard. They just feel they became someone else. That is the power of repetition, not intensity, but consistency. Not how much you do in one day, but how many days in a row you do it. Because each day, you are carving a small line into your identity. Like that stream, you don't see the change immediately, but it is happening quietly, continuously, inevitably. And this is what you need to understand clearly. You cannot build a strong identity with inconsistent actions. You cannot become disciplined if you only act when you feel inspired, because inspiration is unstable. But identity is built from stable repetition. So the question is not, do I feel like doing it today? But am I continuing to be the person I chose to become today? That is a different question. A question not based on emotion, but based on decision. And when you start living by that question, you will realize something. You don't need big progress. You just need to not stop. But here is a truth you must face. Many people know this. They understand that small actions matter, but they still don't act. Not because they don't understand, but because deep inside, they don't truly believe those small things matter. And that is the problem. It's not that you lack action. It's that you underestimate small actions. You are thinking, this isn't that important. But that very thought is breaking your identity building process. Because if you don't respect small things, you will never achieve big things. And that is why, before you can change your actions, you need to change how you see their value. You need to understand that every small action is defining who you are. There is no such thing as an unimportant action. Only actions whose meaning you haven't fully understood. And when you start seeing things this way, you will stop underestimating small choices. You will live more consciously, choose more intentionally, act with more self-respect. But this opens a deeper issue. If small actions are so powerful, why do so many people still not change? Why do they keep repeating old behaviors, even when they know they are not good? The answer is not in action, but in something deeper, the identity they are still holding unconsciously. Mindset 5. You don't fail because of lack of motivation, you fail because of the wrong identity. I want you to think about something familiar. There are days when you feel very motivated. You are full of energy. You work with focus. You act strongly. But then you, on other days, procrastinate, feel lazy, quit halfway. And you ask yourself, why can't I stay consistent? You start thinking maybe you lack motivation. Maybe you don't have enough determination. Maybe you need something to push yourself. But I want to tell you something you may have never considered. Motivation has never been the problem. Because if motivation were the deciding factor, then all successful people would always be inspired. But you know that's not true. There are days they feel tired too. There are days they don't want to do anything, but they still act. Not because they have more motivation than you, but because they have a different identity. Do you see this? You are trying to fix something on the surface, while the problem lies underneath. You think you need more energy, but in reality you need a new definition of yourself. I once observed two people working in the same environment. They had the same opportunities, same resources, same pressure, but their results were completely different. One always procrastinated, always waited for inspiration, always needed motivation. The other just worked, not because he liked it more, not because it was easier, but because, in his world, working is not a choice. It is who he is, and this is what you need to understand deeply. When you think you need motivation to act, you are placing control of your life into something unstable. Motivation comes and goes. Emotions change every day. If you depend on it, you will always rise and fall. But when you act based on identity, everything changes. You no longer ask, "Do I feel like doing it today?" You ask, "Is this what someone like me would do?" That is a different question. A question not based on emotion, but based on who you have chosen to become. I remember once talking to someone trying to quit procrastination. He said, "I just need more motivation." I told him, "No, you need a new identity." He looked confused. I asked him, "What kind of person do you think you are?" He replied, "I'm someone who procrastinates." And I said, "Then, no matter how much motivation you have, you will return to procrastination. Because you cannot live against who you believe you are for long. You can resist it for a while, but eventually you return. Not because you are weak, but because you are loyal to your old identity. And this is what many people don't realize. They don't fail because they lack ability. They don't fail because they lack opportunity. They fail because they are still holding on to an old story about themselves. A story they have repeated too many times. I'm not a disciplined person. I'm not good at consistency. I always start and then quit. And every time they say that, they reinforce it. Not just with words, but with the actions that follow. Because people always try to prove their beliefs are true. If you believe you are someone who quits, you will find ways to quit. If you believe you are inconsistent, you will act inconsistently. Not because you want to, but because that is how identity works. So if you want to change, don't start by looking for more motivation. Start by changing the story you tell yourself. But be careful. This is not about fake positive talk. Not about standing in front of a mirror saying, "I am disciplined." Because if you don't believe it inside, it won't work. Changing identity does not come from words. It comes from evidence. Small evidence. Real actions. Moments where you do what you said, little by little. You don't need to convince yourself with words. You need to prove it with actions. And when you do that long enough, something interesting happens. You no longer need motivation because you no longer rely on feelings to act. You rely on who you have become. And that is a much stronger foundation. But this leads to an even deeper truth. If identity is that powerful, if it determines your actions, then how can small initial actions actually change that identity? How can from very small choices you become a completely different person? The answer lies in a simple but extremely powerful principle. Mindset 6. Every action is a vote for the person you become. I want you to see your life in a completely different way. Not as a sequence of passing days, not as moments of success or failure, but as an election happening every day, every hour, even every moment. And in that election, you are both the voter and the candidate. Every action you take is a vote. There are no neutral actions. There are no meaningless choices. You wake up early, that's a vote for a disciplined person. You procrastinate, that's a vote for a procrastinator. You keep your word, a vote for reliability. You break promises, a vote for weakness. And the important thing is, you don't need to win immediately. You just need to win over time. I have seen many people disappointed in themselves just because they think one wrong action has ruined everything. They eat wrong once and think they failed. They miss one day and think it's over. But that is not how identity is formed. Identity is not decided by one moment. It is decided by trends, not what you do once, but what you do repeatedly. One vote does not decide the result, but hundreds of votes do. And this is where many people go wrong. They focus too much on perfection. They think they must do everything right, but that is not necessary. You don't need to be perfect to become disciplined. You just need to be more consistent than your old self. I remember someone once told me, "I always start strong, but then I ruin everything." I asked him, "Did you ruin everything or did you just vote more for your old self?" He went silent because that question changes perspective. You don't ruin your journey. You are just continuing to vote for the person you are familiar with. And if you want to change the result, you don't need one big action. You need more votes for the new person. That's all. You don't need to become disciplined immediately. You just need to start voting for it. Once, then again, then again. And over time, the result will change. I have seen very ordinary people, nothing special. But they had one thing. They kept voting for who they wanted to become, even if small, even if slow, even if imperfect. And after some time, they became someone they once thought impossible, not because of a breakthrough, but because they never stopped accumulating. That is the true power of repetition. You don't change instantly. You change inevitably. But here is something you must be very careful about. Every time you say, just this once, you think it's an exception, but your brain doesn't see it that way. It records. This is also a vote for procrastination, a vote for avoidance, a vote for breaking your word. And if those votes repeat enough, they become the result. So the question is not, is this action important? But what kind of person is this action voting for? That is a different perspective, one that makes you more aware, more conscious, more responsible for yourself. I'm not asking you to always be right. I just want you to realize that you are always choosing, whether you are aware of it or not. Every time you act, you are telling yourself, this is who I am. And if you repeat that long enough, you will believe it. Not because someone told you, but because you have seen it through your own actions. That is how identity is built, not through affirmations, but through evidence. Small evidence, but real. And when you begin to understand this, you will stop underestimating small choices. You will stop thinking this doesn't matter, because you know everything is being counted. Every vote is recorded, and you are the only one deciding the final result. But the interesting thing is, when you vote long enough for a new identity, something very strange happens. You no longer feel like you are trying. You no longer feel like you are changing. You just feel, this is who I am. And that is the moment of true transformation. Not when you start, but when you no longer think you are starting. But this leads to an even deeper question. If repeating actions can create identity, then why do some people repeat but still don't change? Why do they still feel like they are trying even after acting for a while? The answer lies at an even deeper level, not just in action, but in how you perceive those actions. And that is what we will continue to explore. Mindset 7. When identity changes, effort disappears. I want you to think about something very familiar, but you may have never seen it this way. There are things in your life that you never need to try to do. You don't need motivation to brush your teeth every morning. You don't need discipline to get dressed before going out. You don't need to force yourself to eat when you're hungry. You just do it. No struggle, no overthinking, no procrastination, because to you, it's not a task. It's part of who you are. But then there are other things. You have to remind yourself. You have to push yourself. You have to fight yourself. And you call that lack of discipline. But I want you to pause and look deeper. The difference is not in the action. It's in the identity attached to that action. You don't try to brush your teeth because you see it as something a person like you always does. But you have to try to exercise because deep down, you still don't believe that's who you are. Do you see this? Where you have to try, your identity is not aligned. Where you act naturally, you have already become. And this is the true goal of discipline. Not to force yourself to do more, but to remove the need to force, not to increase willpower, but to reduce internal resistance. I remember once talking to someone trying to change his habits. He said, I'm trying really hard, but I'm always exhausted. I asked him, what are you trying to do? He replied, I'm trying to become a disciplined person. And I told him, that's the problem, because you cannot try to become a person while still believing you are not that person. Every action you take will be pulled back by your internal belief. Like rowing a boat while the anchor is still tied to the bottom. You can move a little, but you will always be pulled back, and you will feel tired, not because you are weak, but because you are fighting in the wrong direction. You are trying to change behavior while keeping the same identity. And that's why many people feel burned out in self-improvement. They think they need to try harder. They think they need more discipline. But the truth is, they are just going in the wrong direction. Real discipline is not a long battle. It is a transformation. A moment when you no longer need to convince yourself. A moment when action becomes natural, not because it's easier, but because it aligns with who you are. I have seen people change this way. At first, they were like you. They had to force themselves to wake up early. They had to force themselves to work. They had to force themselves to keep promises. But over time, something shifted. They stopped saying, I have to do this. They started saying, this is what I do. And that difference, small in words but massive in identity, I have to is obligation. This is who I am is identity. And when you shift from obligation to identity, everything changes. You no longer need daily motivation. You no longer need to push yourself. You just live in alignment with who you chose to be. But understand something important. This transformation does not happen instantly. It does not come from one decision. It comes from continuously voting for the new identity, little by little, day by day, until you no longer feel like you are becoming. You just are. And that is when real discipline begins. Not when you start acting, but when you no longer see it as special action, it becomes normal. But here is something many people overlook. They think changing internally is enough, but they forget their environment is constantly reinforcing or breaking their identity. You can try to change, but if everything around you is pulling you back to your old self, you will keep fighting. And as we said, real discipline is not a long battle. So if you want change to feel more natural, you don't just change inside, you change what surrounds you. And that is what we explore next. Mindset 8. Your environment reinforces or breaks your identity. I want you to imagine a seed, a good seed, healthy, with the potential to become a big tree, but you place it in dry soil. No water, no sunlight, no care. What happens? It doesn't grow. Not because the seed is bad, but because the environment doesn't allow it to become itself. Now imagine taking that same seed and placing it in fertile soil. Enough sunlight, enough water, the right conditions. You don't need to force it to grow. You don't need to push it every day. It just grows. Your life works the same way. You can have willpower. You can have determination. You can want to change, but if your environment goes against the person you want to become, you will always be fighting. And as we said, real discipline is not a long battle. I have met many people who told me, I don't have discipline, but when I looked at their lives, I didn't see a people problem. I saw an environment problem. They want to focus, but they are surrounded by distractions. They want to work, but everything around them makes procrastination easy. They want to change, but they stay in the same space, same habits, same loop, and then they blame themselves. But do you see this? You are not just a product of willpower. You are a product of what you are exposed to daily. Environment does not just affect your actions. It affects how you see yourself. If you are always in a place where people procrastinate, you will start believing it is normal. If you are always in a place where discipline is standard, you will start adjusting to that standard. No one forces you, but you adapt. That is the power of environment. It doesn't push you, it shapes you. I remember someone once told me, I can't focus working at home. I asked him, what do you have at home? He said, TV, phone, bed, everything that makes me want to rest. I said, then the problem is not you. The problem is where you are. Do you see? We often try to change behavior while keeping the environment that creates that behavior. That's like trying not to get wet while standing in the rain. You can try for a while, but you won't last. So if you want to change identity, don't just change inside. Start from the outside. Ask yourself a simple question. What kind of person is this environment reinforcing in me? It could be your desk. It could be the people you spend time with. It could be your daily habits. Everything is sending signals. Everything is telling you, this is how you live. And if you don't change that, you will always be pulled back, not because you are weak, but because environment is stronger than you think. But the good news is, you don't need to change everything. You just need to change a few small things to make the right action easier. Put a book where you can see it, remove distractions. Create spaces that help you focus. Those small changes can create big differences. Because when your environment supports you, you don't have to fight as much. You don't have to force yourself as much. You just do the right thing because it is the easiest option. And when the right thing becomes easy, you repeat it. And when you repeat it long enough, it becomes identity. But understand something important. Environment can support you, but it cannot replace you. You still have to decide. You still have to choose. Environment only does one thing. It tilts the scale. It makes one choice easier than the other. And when you consistently choose right, you build a new identity. But here is a challenge you cannot avoid. Even if you change your environment, even if you start acting, there will be times you feel uncomfortable, you feel tired, you feel like going back. And that's where many people stop. They think, maybe this isn't for me, maybe this is not my path. But they don't understand. That feeling is not a wrong sign. It is a sign you are leaving your old self. And that is what we explore next. Mindset 9. Discomfort is a signal you are leaving your old self. I want you to remember a real moment, a moment you decided to change. Maybe the day you told yourself you would live more disciplined. Maybe when you started a new habit. Maybe when you stopped and faced your life. At first you felt clear, determined, certain, but then a feeling appeared. Not failure, not lack of ability, but discomfort. You felt uneasy. You felt things became heavier. You felt like you were going against yourself. And if you don't understand this, you will think, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I can't do it. Maybe this isn't my path. But I want you to see that feeling differently, not as a sign you are wrong, but as a sign you are changing. Because whenever you leave your old self, you will feel unfamiliar, uncomfortable, not natural, like changing a long-held habit. Your body reacts. Your mind reacts. Not because the new thing is wrong, but because the old thing is familiar. I have seen this clearly in many people. They start a new path. They change their lifestyle. They try to become more disciplined. But when discomfort appears, they stop. Not because they can't continue, but because they misinterpret the feeling. They think ease is right and discomfort is wrong. But the truth is the opposite. Ease often belongs to the old self. Discomfort is often a sign of growth. I remember someone once told me, I don't feel comfortable doing these things. I asked him, what are you doing? He said, I'm waking up earlier. I'm working with structure. I'm stopping procrastination. I smiled and said, then if you felt comfortable, that would be the problem. Because if you change and still feel completely comfortable, then you probably haven't truly changed. You are just doing a lighter version of your old self. You haven't left it. And this is what you need to understand deeply. Discomfort is not the enemy. It is a signal that you are stepping out of the familiar, a signal that you are rewriting your identity. But be careful. Don't confuse meaningful discomfort with meaningless pain. Meaningful discomfort is when you move forward, when you build, when you become better. Meaningless pain is when you repeat old mistakes, when you stay in the wrong place, when you keep doing what you know is wrong. You must distinguish the two, because if not, you will either quit too early or suffer in the wrong direction. But in this journey, if you are building discipline, if you are changing identity, then discomfort is almost unavoidable. There will be days you don't want to act. There will be moments you want to go back. There will be times you doubt yourself. And that's when you must remember. This is not a sign to stop. This is a sign you are moving forward. Because your old self does not disappear immediately. It is still there, still familiar, still pulling you back. And every time you choose not to return, every time you accept discomfort, you are doing something very important. You are separating yourself from your old self, little by little, not with words, but with actions. And over time, that discomfort will change. What was once hard becomes normal. What was once heavy becomes light. Not because it got easier, but because you became the person who fits it. That is how identity changes. Not in one decision, but in a process where you go through discomfort to reach naturalness. And if you stay patient long enough, one day you will realize what once felt difficult is now just how you live. No more fighting, no more forcing, just who you are. But all of this leads us to the most important point. A point that if you don't understand, you will stay stuck in the loop of trying. Because in the end, discipline is not about how much you do, not about how hard you try, but about who you become. And that is where everything comes together. The point where action, identity, and life meet. And that is where we conclude. Mindset 10. Don't try to be disciplined, become a disciplined person. I want you to pause and look back at everything we've covered. You have seen that you don't do what you want, you do what you are. You have seen that discipline is not an action, it is an identity. You have seen that every small action is a vote for who you become. And if you truly understand all of that, you will realize something very important. Your problem was never a lack of discipline. Your problem is that you are still trying to become someone you don't truly believe you are. You are trying to act like a disciplined person. But deep inside, you still hold an old identity. An identity that says, I'm not that kind of person. And as long as that identity exists, all your effort will be temporary. You can force yourself for a while. You can push yourself for a phase. But then you will get tired. You will return. Not because you are weak, but because you are being true to yourself. So what you need is not more willpower, not more motivation, not a new method. What you need is a decision. A decision not about action, but about identity. You need to decide, who am I starting today? Not in the future, not when you're ready, but right now, because the moment you redefine yourself, everything begins to change. Not instantly, but inevitably. I'm not saying you will become perfect. I'm not saying you will never fail. But I am saying you will begin to live differently. You will begin to think differently. You will begin to choose differently. Not because you have to, but because you are. And that is the biggest difference. I have to do this, and this is who I am. One is obligation. One is identity. One needs willpower. One needs honesty. And when you live from identity, you no longer need to prove anything. You don't need to try every day. You don't need to fight yourself. You just need to be consistent with who you chose to be. But understand this. This decision means nothing without action. You cannot just say, I am disciplined, and expect your life to change. You have to live it every day, every choice, every small action, not perfectly, but consistently, because identity is not confirmed by words. It is confirmed by evidence. And that evidence is how you live daily. So instead of asking, do I feel motivated today? Do I feel like doing it? Ask, what would someone like me do in this situation? And then do it, even if small, even if imperfect, even if you don't feel ready, because every time you do, you reinforce one thing. This is who I am. And when you repeat that long enough, you will stop questioning. You will stop hesitating. You just live, not with effort, but with consistency, not with force, but with clarity. And that is where real discipline exists. Not on the days you feel strong, but in how you live, even when you feel nothing, because that is identity, not dependent on emotion, not dependent on circumstance, just who you are. And if you understand this, you will stop searching for quick ways to change your life. You will start building a person for whom that life is a natural result. And when that happens, you don't chase success anymore. You become the person success comes to. And that is where everything changes. Not from the outside, but from the inside, not from what you do, but from who you are. If you remember only one thing from this video, remember this. Discipline is not something you add to your life. It is something you build into yourself. You don't become disciplined by trying harder. You become disciplined by becoming the kind of person for whom those actions are natural. Everything starts with identity, with how you see yourself, with the story you tell in your mind, with the small actions you repeat every day. You don't need to change everything at once. You just need to start with one small thing, one action you will keep, one choice you will follow through. And from there, you build belief, you build identity, you build a new self, little by little, quietly, without rush, but surely. So the question for you is, will you continue living as your old self, or will you start redefining who you are today? If you found this video meaningful, hit like so others can see it too. And if you want to continue this journey of internal transformation, subscribe so we can walk it together. Share this video with someone you know who needs change. And leave a comment. Who are you choosing to become today? Because that answer can change your life. And remember, you can't change your destination overnight, but you can change your direction today. I truly appreciate you staying until the end of this video.